My decision not to fund my son's extravagant wedding had a swift and brutal consequence. He cut off all communication, telling me I was dead to him. Just a few days later, a dinner invitation arrived, supposedly for reconciliation. However, when I got there, 3 lawyers were waiting for me, along with a power of attorney for all my assets. My son told me to sign it or I would never see my grandson again. I calmly took out my phone, made a call, and explained that I would, but first, someone wanted to say a few words. The wedding brochures lay scattered across my coffee table, like so many fallen leaves. Each one seemed to be more expensive than the last. Andy's voice was sharp with frustration as he insisted this was his and Brittany's dream wedding and I just didn't understand. I sat in the blue velvet armchair that had been my wife Martha's favorite for the 37 years we were married. The fabric still carried a faint scent of her lavender perfume. 2 years had passed since the funeral, yet my fingers still traced the worn armrest as I watched my son pace near the bay window. His reflection seemed like a ghost against the October darkness. Between us lay glossy photographs of elegant crystal ballrooms and cascading floral arrangements. Places like the Ritz-Carlton and the Hay Adams, where senators and ambassadors hosted grand events. Every contract had a price tag that made my retired teacher's pension seem like pocket change. I told my son that I was prepared to give him $20,000, which I thought was a very generous amount. Brittany was perched on the edge of my sofa, a manicured hand resting on her barely visible pregnancy bump. She had announced last month with tears of joy that she was 3 months along, but the happiness had quickly been replaced by a sense of urgency about wedding plans. Now those same green eyes glistened with fresh tears as she whispered my name, suggesting that other parents wouldn't hesitate to spend money on their children's happiness and that this was also about my future grandchild. Her manipulative words hung in the air as thick as a morning fog. Andy stopped pacing, his jaw set in that stubborn line I had seen since he was 12. But this wasn't about forgotten homework or a missed curfew, this was about $70,000, which was more than my annual income. Gathering the scattered brochures with steady hands, I explained that $20,000 would pay for a beautiful ceremony. My mother and I had only spent $800 on our wedding, and we were happy. Andy's voice cracked with a mixture of anger and desperation, as he replied that it was different, and that both Brittany and our child deserved better. I stood slowly, my knees protesting the evening dampness. I crossed to my son and reached for his shoulders, the same broad shoulders I had taught to swing a baseball bat, to tie a necktie, and to carry responsibility. He jerked his body away from me as if I had burned him. His voice was cold and final as he told me to stop. Brittany smoothed her designer dress over her slim figure. She gracefully linked her arm through Andy's in a practiced, possessive gesture, guiding him toward the front door as if she were a trainer with a prize show horse. Without looking back, my son told me he had no interest in speaking to me again and that I was dead to me. The front door slammed with enough force to rattle the family photographs on my mantel. Through the window, I watched them climb into his silver sedan, the one I had co-signed for when his credit couldn't handle the payments. The red taillights disappeared around the corner, leaving only the yellow glow of the street lamps and my own reflection staring back at me. I picked up one of the scattered brochures, the one for the grand ballroom at the Willard Intercontinental, a place with cherry blossoms and gold fixtures where presidents had once danced. I set it aside on the table next to Martha's reading glasses, which I had never had the heart to put away. Silence filled the house like water in a sinking ship. 3 weeks of silence stretched between us like a frozen, dangerous lake. I stuck to my morning routine, coffee at 7:30, the newspaper spread across the same oak kitchen table where I had graded history papers for 30 years. My World's Best Teacher mug, a Father's Day gift from my daughter Michelle in 2003, sat half-empty beside the sports section. My landline, the one Martha had insisted we keep for emergencies, rang sharply, cutting through the morning news. I glanced at the caller ID, expecting it to be my neighbor, Tom, asking about our weekly chess game. Instead, I saw Andy's number, unblocked for the first time since that October evening. My hand hovered over the receiver. 3 weeks of hoping he would call, 3 weeks of stubborn silence on both sides. The wedding brochure still lay on the living room table, a glossy reminder of our fractured relationship. I answered the phone. My son's voice was on the other end, carrying an unfamiliar softness, as if he were speaking through cotton. He suggested that maybe we could talk things out. His tone made my teacher's instincts prickle. 40 years of classroom experience had taught me how to recognize when students were reading from a prepared script. This wasn't my son's natural way of speaking, it was too measured, too careful. Still, I told him I would like that. He then mentioned that Brittany was pregnant, and he wanted his son to know his grandfather. He said he didn't want the baby growing up thinking I didn't care. The manipulation was subtle but unmistakable, using an unborn child's future as a weapon and painting me as the negligent grandfather before the baby had even drawn breath. Still, a faint hope flickered in my chest like a candle in the wind. I asked what he had in mind. He suggested we meet at the Capitol Grill to talk things through. The Capitol Grill, where the lobster costs more than my weekly grocery budget and wine bottle started at what I spent on utilities. My pen paused over my daily planner, the same leather-bound organizer I had used since 1995. Warning bells chimed in my head, but I silenced them. Maybe Andy wanted neutral ground. Maybe expensive surroundings would remind him of the life I had helped him build, the education I had funded, the car loan I had guaranteed, and the countless times I had been there when his own choices led to financial trouble. I agreed to be there that evening at 7 and told him I would make a reservation. After hanging up, I sat staring at Martha's photograph on the refrigerator. Her smile seemed knowing, as if she could see through this olive branch to whatever lay beneath. I touched my wedding ring, the thin gold band worn smooth from 43 years of marriage, seeking her guidance in the morning stillness. The wall clock showed 9:47 a.m., giving me the entire day to think about the evening ahead. All day to hope this meant a genuine reconciliation, and all day to ignore the voice whispering that Andy's sudden change of heart felt as artificial as Brittany's tears. I opened my planner and wrote, "Dinner with Andy, 7 p.m., the Capitol Grill." My handwriting looked steady enough, even if my hopes weren't. My Honda Civic's engine started with its familiar, reliable hum. I had left the house at exactly 6:30 for our 7 o'clock reservation, allowing time for the inevitable Arlington traffic. But instead of taking my usual route, I found myself turning toward Arlington High School, drawn by an inexplicable need to revisit the geography of better times. The school's red brick facade looked identical to how it had looked 17 years ago when Andy had graduated. The same colonial architecture, the same green athletic fields. Only the electronic message board was new, flashing announcements about homecoming and college prep seminars in bright LED letters. I slowed the car to a crawl, not parking, but letting memories wash over me like the morning tide. I remembered Andy in his cap and gown, and Martha snapping photos with her old film camera, her proud tears catching the June sunlight. She had whispered to me that he was going to do great things. I thought about how many carpools to football practice I had driven and how many parent-teacher conferences I had attended where other educators praised Andy's potential, his charm, and his natural leadership abilities. The boy who had helped elderly neighbors with their groceries had somehow become a man who told his own father he was dead to him over wedding expenses. I pressed the accelerator and continued toward Riverside Park, the Honda's tires crunching over fallen leaves. The park's entrance welcomed me with the same wooden sign that Andy had helped me repaint during his Eagle Scout project. Inside, the lake reflected the last golden light of autumn. The empty swings moved gently in the evening breeze. I parked for exactly 3 minutes, staring at the weathered picnic table where we had celebrated Andy's Little League championship in 1997. Martha had packed his favorite chocolate cake, and we had eaten it with plastic forks while mosquitoes buzzed around our heads. Andy had been 11, with gaps in his teeth and sunburned skin, chattering about the game-winning home run he had hit in the final inning. On that day, she had told me that children were our most important investment, watching Andy skip stones across the lake. Her voice echoed through my memory, tinged with the wisdom of someone who knew her time was limited, even when we thought we had forever. I touched my wedding ring, a habit that came whenever Martha's absence felt most acute. The thin gold band had loosened over the years, sliding easily around my finger like a worry stone, worn smooth by constant motion. The community center appeared ahead, its windows glowing with evening activities. A banner stretched across the entrance announced Senior Dance Night Thursdays. I had volunteered there for 5 years after retirement, teaching basic waltz steps to widows and widowers, learning to navigate life alone. Andy used to help me set up folding chairs, joking that he was my assistant dance instructor while earning community service hours for school. Where had that helpful boy gone? When exactly had his consideration transformed into a sense of entitlement and his gratitude into a demand? I couldn't pinpoint the moment my son had changed. Or maybe I had simply refused to see it happening. Traffic was light as I merged onto Arlington Boulevard. The radio played Vivaldi's Four Seasons, and Autumn appropriately. The classical station had been Martha's preference, and I had never switched it after her funeral. Some habits become shrines to the people we have lost. At 6:55, I pulled into the Capitol Grille's valet area. The restaurant's glass windows revealed warm lighting, white tablecloths, and the kind of clientele that discussed stock portfolios over appetizers. I adjusted my tie in the rearview mirror, catching sight of my own aged eyes, gray-blue like my father's, and now creased with 70 years of laughter and worry. Taking a deep breath of crisp October air, I walked toward the entrance. Through the glass, I could see the dining room's elegant bustle. Servers in black uniforms glided between tables like dancers in some choreographed performance. Maybe Andy had come to his senses. Maybe this expensive neutral ground would help us find our way back to each other. Maybe my grandson would grow up knowing his grandfather as more than just a cautionary tale about a stubborn old man who didn't understand modern expectations. The brass door handle felt cold under my palm as I pushed into the warmth and candlelight. Hope flickered against experience like a match struck in the wind. The hostess smiled with professional warmth, her black dress crisp against the restaurant's mahogany interior. She asked if I was with the Harper party, and when I confirmed that I was, she led me to a private dining room. A private dining room? I had expected a regular table, maybe near the window where Andy and I could watch the evening traffic while we talked. Instead, she led me down a corridor lined with oil paintings of hunting scenes, past the main dining area's comfortable chatter. The room she opened felt more like a boardroom than a family gathering place. A large oval table dominated the space, surrounded by 8 leather chairs instead of the intimate setting I had imagined. Briefcases sat beside several seats like sleeping guard dogs. Manila folders formed neat stacks across the polished surface. Andy sat in a chair halfway around the table, his shoulders hunched forward, his hands twisting a cloth napkin into a rope-like spiral. He didn't meet my eyes when I entered, focusing instead on the shredded fabric between his fingers. Brittany rose gracefully from her seat, one hand resting on her barely visible bump, the other extended in greeting. She thanked me for coming to discuss our family's future. 3 strangers in business suits flanked her like a professional army. The woman closest to Brittany stood with practiced confidence, her silver hair swept back, her handshake firm enough to prove something. She introduced herself as Amanda Clark, my family's advisor, and introduced her colleagues, James Wilson and Sarah Miller. A family advisor? I had never heard of Amanda Clark in my life. My voice carried the same tone I had used with disruptive parents during conferences, calm, but unmistakably firm, as I explained that I thought we had come here to discuss family, not business. Amanda's smile never wavered as she explained that this was family business and that at my age, managing complex financial decisions could become overwhelming. She said they were here to help streamline things. The document spread before me looked official, stamped and notarized, thick with legal language that seemed designed more to confuse than clarify. Power of attorney forms, financial management agreements, and references to my advanced age and complex asset portfolio filled the pages like accusations. I removed my reading glasses from my jacket pocket, taking my time to clean the lenses. 40 years of teaching had taught me the value of deliberate pauses and how silence could shift power dynamics in a room. These people expected confusion, maybe even fear. Instead, I sat down slowly and began to read. My son's voice was barely a whisper as he said this was just a formality for my own protection. Protection from what exactly? James Wilson leaned forward, his pen clicking in rapid succession, as he explained that these documents simply ensured my assets would be managed properly should I become incapacitated. The word incapacitated hung in the air like smoke, as if my 65 years had already stolen my competence, my judgment, and my right to control my own life. I pointed out the references to my house value, my savings account balance, and even my pension amount. They were quite detailed for a casual family dinner. Brittany shifted in her seat, her confidence flickering like a candlelight in the wind. She said they just wanted to make sure everything was handled correctly for everyone's benefit. I repeated the phrase, everyone's benefit, tasting its hollowness. And who exactly benefited from signing these papers tonight? Andy's napkin lay in shreds across his plate, his silver engagement ring, the one Martha and I had helped him pick out, catching the chandelier's light as his hands trembled against the table. I spoke quietly, looking around the room at the assembled lawyers, the prepared documents, and the reservation for a private space. I explained that this had taken weeks to prepare, all while he wasn't speaking to me. The realization settled over me like cold water. The 3 weeks of silence. The sudden reconciliation call this morning. The expensive restaurant choice. Every detail had been calculated, planned, and orchestrated. My son hadn't called because he missed me. He had called because he needed my signature. I reached into my jacket pocket for my phone, my fingers closing around its familiar weight. Amanda Clark's voice cut through the gesture like a blade. She urged me to handle this quickly tonight. My thumb found my daughter's contact without looking, the muscle memory from 2 years of single parenthood and countless late-night calls during Martha's final illness. The routine of checking in with my daughter, who had inherited her mother's fierce protectiveness. Andy lurched forward, reaching across the table toward my phone, his chair scraping against the hardwood with a sharp sound like breaking glass. I blocked his grab with my free arm, the motion automatic from decades of managing classroom disruptions. I told him not to touch my phone, and the authority in my voice stopped him mid-reach. For a moment, he was 12 again, caught sneaking cookies before dinner, recognizing the tone that meant consequences were coming. Amanda Clark's professional smile finally cracked. She told me they were just trying to help me make good decisions and that my daughter didn't need to be involved in my financial planning. I said that she was involved now, pressed call, and held the phone to my ear. The lawyers exchanged glances like players who realized their game had shifted. James Wilson stopped clicking his pen. Sarah Miller straightened papers that didn't need straightening. Only Brittany remained motionless, her green eyes fixed on me with laser intensity. I could hear the slight breathlessness in Michelle's voice, as if I had interrupted her during evening rounds. I told her I needed her help and to come to the Capitol Grill right away. Her medical training immediately analyzed the urgency in my voice as she asked what was wrong. I explained that I was in a private dining room with Andy, his girlfriend, and 3 lawyers I had never met. I said that they wanted me to sign power of attorney documents. The silence on the line lasted for exactly 3 heartbeats. When she spoke again, her voice carried the crisp professionalism she used with difficult patience. She told me not to sign anything, that she was leaving the clinic now, and would be there in 15 minutes. We would wait. Amanda Clark's tone sharpened. She interjected that the delay was unnecessary and expensive and that they just wanted to finish this quickly. I covered the phone's mouthpiece and told them nothing would get signed quickly and that we would wait for my daughter. Brittany stood abruptly, pacing behind her chair like a caged animal. Her earlier composure had evaporated, replaced by something harder and more calculating. She asked why I was being so difficult, saying that they were my family. The irony was not lost on me. For 3 weeks, I had been dead to them. Now, suddenly, I was family again, but only if I surrendered control of my finances. My son's voice cracked with genuine desperation as he asked me to please just trust him on this. The word trust cut deeper than any legal document could. This wasn't about money or lawyers or power of attorney forms. This was about my son asking me to trust him while surrounding me with strangers, ambushing me with prepared documents, and manipulating our first conversation in weeks. I asked Michelle if she was still there. She said she was in her car and told me to keep them talking but not to sign anything. She said the tactics they were using were familiar from elder abuse cases she had seen. Elder abuse. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I was not some confused senior citizen losing his faculties. I was a retired teacher who had managed budgets, mortgages, and investments for decades. Yet here sat 3 lawyers treating me like an incompetent child. My son insisted that Michelle didn't need to be involved and that this was only a matter between us. I told him that was no longer the case, it had stopped being a private matter the moment he involved lawyers. James Wilson cleared his throat and explained that while the situation might seem overwhelming, these were just standard estate planning documents that many families use. I countered that estate planning doesn't typically occur during a restaurant ambush. Sarah Miller leaned forward with feigned concern, suggesting that they were only considering my best interests, and that at my age, it was a good idea to have assistance with complex decisions. The phrase, "at my age," came up again, a clear insinuation that 65 meant incompetence and mental decline. I ended the call and slipped the phone back into my pocket, informing them that we would wait since Michelle would be there soon. The room became quiet except for the distant sounds of other diners enjoying their meals, families celebrating anniversaries, business associates closing honest deals, and couples planning futures that didn't involve legal manipulation. Brittany's composure broke, and her words came through clenched teeth as she told me to wait while she explained exactly what happens to grandfathers who don't cooperate. Her hand moved to her stomach with theatrical precision, her fingers splayed across her barely visible pregnancy bump. She claimed that she really wanted our son to have a loving grandfather, someone who would support our family, be part of his life, and help him grow up knowing what family meant. Her manipulative words were a surgical strike. Andy's voice was desperate as he told me that if I didn't sign, I would never see my son grow up. 40 years of teaching children, of watching them grow, had prepared me for many things, but the thought of being cut off from my grandson's life, missing his first words, his first day of school, his baseball games, and birthday parties, was almost unbearable. James Wilson added with professional detachment that grandfathers had very limited legal rights and that courts strongly favored parents who demonstrated family unity. Sarah Miller nodded sympathetically and explained that my refusal could be seen as evidence that I was putting my own interests above the family's welfare. Brittany continued, touching her belly with increasing frequency, claiming that the stress wasn't good for the baby. She said she only wanted peace for their family and that maybe it would be better if the baby didn't grow up knowing family members who didn't support them. Andy grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my sleeve, telling me to choose, my money or my grandson. He added that he wouldn't let someone who didn't trust him be around his child, and his voice broke completely as he said that if I couldn't support their decisions, I couldn't be part of their life. The lawyers shuffled papers, which I knew were likely custody documents or restraining order templates, showing exactly how far they were willing to take this. They had done this before. I realized elder financial exploitation was not a new thing for them, but rather a refined process. A shift was happening inside me. My teacher's instinct recognized the bullying and cruelty that had crossed the line from persuasion. I had seen students threaten others with social isolation and watched manipulative parents try to control their children through emotional blackmail. The tactics were identical, but the stakes were much higher. I straightened in my chair, finding the authority I had carried through 4 decades of teaching. My grandson would know the truth about his real grandfather. Brittany's mask slipped completely as she snapped, wondering what I meant. I said that a real grandfather doesn't need lawyers to prove his love, and a real family doesn't hold children hostage for signatures. My son's grip on my arm tightened as he pleaded with me, telling me he needed this. I told him that he didn't need it, he wanted it, and there was a difference. This was the kind of lesson I had taught countless students about making decisions and the consequences. I realized that signing these papers would not protect my relationship with my grandson, it would only enable the toxic environment in which he would grow up, where love came with conditions and family meant manipulation. Just as I opened my mouth to explain this to Andy, a soft knock interrupted me. A restaurant staff member peered in apologetically and announced that Dr. Harper had arrived. Michelle strode into the private dining room with the confident efficiency I had watched her develop throughout medical school and residency. She moved directly to my side, her trained eyes sweeping the room in seconds, and asked what was happening and if I was all right. Her fingers found my wrist with a practiced ease, checking my pulse, just as she had been taught to assess patients in a crisis. She quietly noted that my blood pressure was elevated and asked how long the situation had been going on. My voice was steady as I replied, about an hour. Michelle picked up the nearest legal document and her eyes scanned the pages with the speed reading skills she had developed in medical school. The power of attorney forms, financial management clauses, and references to cognitive decline made her jaw tighten with professional outrage. She used the same authority she used with unruly residents as she told Andy that this was not what they had discussed as a family and asked him when he had decided to ambush me with lawyers. My son shrank in his chair, telling her that they were just trying to help. Michelle set the papers down with controlled force, saying that this was a textbook case of elder financial exploitation, which she saw every week in the emergency room, family members pressuring seniors into signing over assets. Brittany suddenly stood up, telling Michelle that she didn't understand the full situation and that her father needed guidance with complex financial decisions. With icy precision, Michelle said that I had taught high school for 40 years, managed budgets and investments, and put 2 children through college. She asked what complex decisions I needed help with. The question hung in the air like a challenge. Amanda Clark attempted to regain control, but Michelle's voice carried the absolute authority of someone accustomed to making life and death decisions. Michelle positioned herself between the lawyers and me, telling her that it became a medical matter the moment they decided to stress an elderly man into signing legal documents, and as a physician, she was required to report suspected elder abuse. The word abuse cut through the room like a blade. Everyone needed to step back and give us 5 minutes alone. She said the conversation was over until she understood exactly what had been happening here. Brittany's carefully constructed mask began to crack completely as she told Michelle that she couldn't just walk in and disrupt their family planning and that this didn't concern her. My father's welfare concerned her deeply, especially when someone was using pregnancy and unborn children as leverage for financial manipulation. The accuracy of Michelle's assessment hit Brittany like a physical blow. Her hand dropped from her belly, the protective gesture forgotten in the face of the clinical analysis. Michelle turned to Andy and told him to look at me, asking if I seemed confused or incompetent, or if I seemed like a man being cornered by people who wanted his money. My son's eyes met mine for the first time since I had entered the restaurant. He flinched as if slapped by the look he saw there. He started to say he thought, but stopped, and Michelle finished his thought with surgical precision. He thought what Brittany had told him to think. My daughter said she thought it was time for me to make that other phone call I had mentioned. I reached for my phone again, and this time, no one moved to stop me. Luis Ramirez arrived with the punctuality of someone who had been expecting my call for weeks. He greeted me warmly, his professional gaze sweeping the room. I noticed that we had reached the moment we had discussed. I told Luis to show them what we had prepared on October 20th. The date meant nothing to Michelle, but I watched as Andy's eyes widened in realization. October 20th, only 5 days after our wedding argument and 5 days after he had called me dead to him. The timing was not coincidental, and he was beginning to understand. Luis opened his briefcase with deliberate care, removing folders marked with official seals. He announced that he would like to present the Harper Family Irrevocable Trust, which was established on October 20th, 2024. Amanda Clark leaned forward, her professional composure cracking, as she repeated the words, irrevocable trust, and stated that I had never mentioned it. Luis interrupted smoothly, saying that I had no obligation to mention my private legal affairs to strangers. The trust encompassed all major assets, the family home, investment accounts, retirement funds, and insurance policies. I met her eyes steadily, telling her that it wasn't necessary to tell her until now. I asked Luis to explain the trustee designation. He announced that Dr. Michelle Harper had been designated as the sole trustee, spreading the official documents across the table like a royal flush. He added that all financial decisions had to be made through her with oversight from his firm. The silence that followed was deafening. Brittany's face had gone white. The lawyers exchanged glances that spoke of professional embarrassment and potential liability. Andy's voice was thick with realization as he said I had planned this and had known all along. I kept my tone gentle, telling him I had suspected something and that his phone call that morning had confirmed it. His speech patterns had been wrong, too scripted, and after 40 years of teaching, I could recognize when someone was reading from a script. Luis continued, explaining that an irrevocable trust could not be challenged, altered, or dissolved without the trustee's consent. Dr. Harper now had complete fiduciary responsibility for the assets. Michelle stood frozen, processing the magnitude of what I had entrusted to her. I confirmed that it was everything I had built over 43 years of marriage and my career, and I told her that I trusted her to protect it for the family's real future, including the grandson I might never get to meet. The barb found its target as Andy winced as if I had struck him physically. Brittany desperately insisted that this didn't change anything, that the trust still benefited Andy and the baby, and that they just needed to work with Michelle. Michelle firmly said no, stating that as trustee, she had discretionary authority over distributions and that she did not make decisions under duress or manipulation. Amanda Clark frantically shuffled papers, saying that they would need to review the documents thoroughly and challenge the mental competency standards used. Luis, with the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards, told her to feel free, mentioning that a medical evaluation from last week confirmed my complete mental competency and that they had anticipated that particular challenge. Andy slumped in his chair, the weight of his betrayal settling over him like a physical burden. He said that I had really thought of everything. The sadness in my voice was genuine as I told him I had to because he had decided to hire lawyers instead of having an honest conversation with his father. I wasn't finished yet. I told Luis to show them the other folder. Luis reached into his briefcase and withdrew a second, thicker folder. The manila envelope had the letterhead of a private investigation firm, and when he opened it, photographs spilled across the table like evidence in a crime scene. Luis announced with the methodical precision of a prosecutor that I had contracted professional surveillance services on October 21st. The first photograph showed Brittany standing at my front gate, her phone raised toward my house, time-stamped October 23rd. The second captured her writing in a notebook in her car. The third showed her photographing my mailbox. Brittany began to speak but stopped, her face cycling through shock, anger, and calculation. I calmly said that it was documentation of her reconnaissance activities, including her research into my financial records, her conversations about my mental competency, and her coaching sessions with my son. Michelle picked up one of the photographs and studied it with clinical detachment, saying that Brittany had been surveilling my house and planning this for weeks. Luis continued, producing a small digital device with a recording from October 28th. He asked if they would like to hear Ms. Lawson explaining to a friend how she planned to have me declared incompetent. Brittany snapped that they couldn't record private conversations. Luis smoothly replied that Virginia was a one-party consent state, and conversations in public spaces like coffee shops were fair game. He pressed play, and Brittany's voice filled the room, saying that the pregnancy gave them leverage and that they should threaten to keep the grandfather away from the baby if he didn't cooperate. She said older men were suckers for grandchildren. Andy's face went ashen as he realized what he had been a part of. The silence that followed was profound. Even the lawyers had stopped their defensive shuffling, recognizing that they had been made accessories to a carefully planned fraud. Luis said there was more, spreading additional documents, including Brittany's credit reports showing $85,000 in debt, bank records of her attempts to research my assets, and phone records of coordination calls with the legal team. I gently told Andy to look at what he had been a part of, that it wasn't family reconciliation, but a criminal conspiracy to defraud an elderly man. My son whispered that he didn't know. He thought she had said I was having trouble and that they were helping. Brittany hissed at him, telling him not to pretend he didn't know exactly what they were doing. Luis interjected that the recording suggested my son had been deliberately misled about the scope of the operation and that while he was complicit, he appeared to have been manipulated as well. Michelle had been studying the evidence with her trained analytical mind and asked how long I had known. I told her I suspected something after Andy's tone during the phone call, as his speech patterns had been wrong, too scripted, but I hadn't known the full extent until Luis had shown me the files yesterday. The private dining room felt like a courtroom now, with evidence spread across the table and guilt written on faces around the room. Amanda Clark and her associates were frantically packing their briefcases, recognizing their professional liability in the situation. "We'll be in touch about potential criminal charges," Luis told the departing lawyers. "Elder financial abuse carries serious penalties in Virginia." Brittany stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "You think this is over? You'll never see that baby. Never. I'll make sure of it." But the threat carried no weight now. The evidence showed her true nature, her willingness to weaponize an unborn child for financial gain. Any court would see through her manipulations as clearly as we had. Andy remained seated, staring at his hands, processing the full scope of how he'd been used. The lawyers were gone, their hurried departure leaving only family and the devastating truth scattered across an expensive restaurant table. I stood slowly, straightening my tie with the same deliberate precision I'd used after difficult parent conferences. The gesture felt familiar, comforting, a return to the dignity that had carried me through 40 years of challenging conversations. Around the table, evidence of betrayal lay scattered like fallen leaves, but I felt oddly peaceful. Michelle moved to my side immediately, her protective instincts as natural as breathing. Her presence reminded me that not all family bonds had been severed tonight. That loyalty still existed in unexpected forms. Andy half rose from his chair, one hand reaching toward me with desperate uncertainty. "Dad, I didn't want. I didn't know it would." "You knew, Andy." My voice carried no anger now. Just the weary disappointment of a teacher watching a promising student make terrible choices. "You just chose the easier path." Brittany remained standing by her chair, fury radiating from her like heat. Her pregnancy, which had been her primary weapon all evening, now seemed irrelevant. The baby growing inside her would be born into a world where his grandfather had protected himself from his own family. "This isn't over," she said through clenched teeth. "You'll never see him grow up. Never know what he looks like, sounds like, dreams about. I'll make sure of it." "Brittany," I said calmly. "You've shown everyone in this room exactly who you are. Any court will see the same thing." Luis finished packing the evidence into his briefcase. Each document a testament to months of careful preparation. The private investigator's work had been thorough, professional, devastating. Amanda Clark and her colleagues had fled like rats from a sinking ship, leaving their client to face the consequences alone. I walked toward the dining room's entrance, Michelle beside me, feeling lighter with each step. Behind us, Andy's chair scraped again as he stood fully. "Dad, wait." His voice cracked with something I hadn't heard in years. Genuine remorse. "Can we? Is there any way to fix this?" I paused at the threshold, looking back at my son. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and his expensive clothes hung loose on a frame that had lost weight from stress. This wasn't the confident young man who charmed his way through life, or even the manipulated puppet Brittany had controlled. This was someone beginning to understand the magnitude of his choices. "Son, call me when you're ready to talk without her." The conditional offer hung in the air between us. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but possibility. The door left slightly ajar for genuine change, honest conversation, real growth. "The door is always open for a real conversation," I added, meaning it completely. Michelle squeezed my arm gently, understanding the wisdom in the conditional mercy. As a doctor, she'd seen families recover from devastating diagnosis through honest communication and hard work. She knew healing was possible, but only with authentic effort. We walked through the restaurant's main dining room, past tables of families enjoying normal meals, normal conversations, normal love that didn't require lawyers or surveillance or manipulation. The contrast struck me deeply. How simple family life could be when built on respect rather than exploitation. In the parking lot, November air cut through our formal clothes with crisp efficiency. Michelle helped me into the Honda Civic, her protective gestures natural and unforced. Behind us, the Capitol Grill glowed with warm light, unaware of the family drama that had just concluded within its walls. As I started the engine, I looked back at the restaurant one final time. Through the windows, I could see the private dining room where my son still sat, probably staring at the evidence of his betrayal. Brittany would be planning her next move, calculating new angles of attack. But for the first time in months, their schemes couldn't touch me. Now I understand why your mother always said some lessons hurt the most, I said quietly, putting the car in drive. Martha had been right. The most important lessons about boundaries, self-respect, conditional love, often came wrapped in pain that felt unbearable until you realized it had made you stronger. The chess piece moved across the board with Tom Brown's steady hand. A knight capturing my rook with surgical precision. Across from me in Riverside Park's pavilion, my new friend grinned with the satisfaction of someone who'd been planning that move for 6 turns. Checkmate in 3, he announced, leaning back in his folding chair. Tom had appeared in my life, like Martha used to say, good things did quietly when you most needed them. A retired colleague from Arlington High's English department. He had heard about my situation through the teacher's grapevine and simply started showing up for daily walks. No judgment, no advice, just steady companionship and surprisingly ruthless chess skills. You're getting better, he said, resetting the pieces. Last week, it was checkmate in 5. The past month had passed in a blur of legal paperwork and emotional recovery. Louise updated me regularly on the aftermath. Brittany's lawyers had quietly withdrawn from the case, citing irreconcilable differences with client goals. Andy had attempted contact twice through Michelle. Both times asking about simpler wedding arrangements that wouldn't require family funding. Tom, I feel freer than I have in years, I said, moving my opening pawn. Freedom's underrated, he replied, mirroring my move. My daughter tried the same thing after Helen died. Wanted to help me manage my finances. Turns out her help cost about $40,000 in credit card debt. I'd learned that financial exploitation of seniors was frighteningly common. Tom's experience, while less dramatic than mine, followed similar patterns. Emotional manipulation, isolation tactics, gradual assumption of control over resources. How did you handle it? Lawyer, boundaries, and distance. His bishop swept across the board. Amazing how much clearer family relationships become when money's off the table. Louise had called yesterday with interesting news. The private investigator's final report revealed the full scope of Brittany's desperation. $85,000 in debt, creditors threatening legal action, her marketing job hanging by a thread due to performance issues. Andy had been her financial lifeline, and I had been the pot of gold she planned to access through marriage. Check, Tom announced, his queen cornering my king. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. Dad, Andy called. Baby due in April wants to know if you'd consider meeting grandson someday. Your call entirely. I showed Tom the message. He studied it while contemplating his next move. Grandchildren complicate everything, he said. But they also clarify everything. What matters to you more, being right or being present? The question haunted me through the rest of our game, which Tom won handily. As we packed up the chess set, he mentioned something that would change my trajectory completely. There's this support group at Arlington Elder Care Center. Seniors who've been through financial exploitation. They could use someone with your experience to help facilitate discussions. Arlington Elder Care Center occupied a converted mansion on Wilson Boulevard, its rooms filled with afternoon light and the gentle bustle of people refusing to surrender to age's limitations. The director, Margaret Chen, welcomed me with the enthusiasm of someone perpetually understaffed and grateful for volunteers. Financial exploitation is epidemic, she explained, leading me through the community room. Family members, caregivers, even friends target seniors with assets. Most victims are too embarrassed to report it. The support group met Thursdays at 2 o'clock. 15 to 20 seniors sharing experiences, strategies, and mutual encouragement. Margaret introduced me as someone who successfully protected himself from a sophisticated exploitation attempt. For the first time since the restaurant confrontation, I felt the pieces of my life clicking into place with purpose. Experience taught me how to protect others, I told the group at my first meeting. Maybe that's what it was for. The faces around the circle, weathered, wise, wounded but not broken, nodded with understanding. These were my people, survivors of family betrayal, who'd chosen dignity over enablement, safety over appearances. As December deepened into winter, my routine solidified around this new mission. Morning chess with Tom, afternoon support groups, evening reading about elder law and financial protection. Louise connected me with attorneys who specialized in protecting seniors' assets. Michelle checked in regularly, proud of my transformation from victim to advocate. The support group grew. Word spread through senior centers, retirement communities, and medical offices. Stories emerged of manipulation, exploitation, and recovery that made my restaurant confrontation seem almost mild by comparison. But each story also contained threads of hope. Survivors who'd reclaimed their autonomy and built new lives around self-respect rather than family approval. We were creating something valuable, a community of protection, wisdom, and mutual support. On December 20th, as I prepared for our largest support group meeting yet, Margaret approached with a message slip. Mr. Harper, you have a call. It's about your son. The phone call came at 6:47 a.m., Michelle's voice carrying the controlled excitement of someone who'd been awake for hours. Dad, Andy called. The baby arrived early, 7 pounds 2 ounces. They're both healthy. I sat at my kitchen table, the same oak surface where I had graded papers for 30 years, now covered with support group materials and elder protection resources. Outside, April morning light filtered through trees, beginning their spring transformation. Congratulations on your grandson, I said, meaning it completely. Andy wants to know if you'd like to meet him, Michelle continued carefully. He said he's been thinking about what you said at the restaurant. 4 months of leading support groups had crystallized my understanding of family manipulation patterns. I'd helped dozens of seniors establish boundaries with exploitative relatives, watched them discover that love without conditions was stronger than love with strings attached. What's he been thinking about specifically that maybe he needs to have that conversation without Brittany present? The answer surprised me. Through Michelle, I'd learned that Andy and Brittany had managed a small, modest wedding in February. Courthouse ceremony, immediate family only, no expensive venue or elaborate celebration. The financial pressure had apparently forced them toward simplicity. I walked to my desk and retrieved a letter I'd been revising for weeks. Handwritten on my personal stationery, it contained the boundaries I'd established for any future relationship with my son and grandson. Michelle, I'm sending Andy a letter today. He can read my conditions and decide if he's ready for real change. The letter was precise, professional, and non-negotiable. Andrew, congratulations on your son's birth. I'm genuinely happy for this new chapter in your life. If you'd like to rebuild our relationship, these conditions are non-negotiable. 1. All contact goes through Michelle until trust is re-established. 2. No financial discussions during any family interactions. 3. Brittany may not be present during visits with me or my grandson. 4. You attend family counseling to address manipulation patterns. 5. Full acknowledgement of the restaurant incident and your role in it. These aren't punishments. They are protections for both of us. If you're ready for an honest relationship, I'm here. If not, I wish you well, Dad. The letter represented everything I'd learned about conditional love, protective boundaries, and the difference between enabling and helping. The support group had taught me that real family relationships required mutual respect, not financial obligation. By afternoon, I was at Arlington Elder Care Center preparing for our weekly meeting. The support group had grown to 23 regular members with occasional newcomers learning to recognize and resist family financial exploitation. Today, we're discussing grandchildren as manipulation tools, I announced to the circle of familiar faces. Many of you have experienced threats about access to grandchildren as pressure for financial compliance. Rose Martinez, a 72-year-old retired nurse, nodded vigorously. My daughter said I'd never see my granddaughter again if I didn't co-sign her mortgage. That was 3 years ago. How do you feel about that decision now? I asked. Free, Rose said simply. My granddaughter found me on Facebook last year. She's 15, old enough to understand that love doesn't come with a price tag. The room murmured with understanding. We'd all learned that children eventually see through parental manipulation, that authentic relationships survive boundary setting, that self-respect was more valuable than family approval. Mr. Harper, called Sarah Kim from across the circle. How are you handling your new grandson situation? Same way I'd advise any of you, I replied. Clear boundaries, conditional contact, no financial discussions. My happiness no longer depends on anyone's approval, not even family. After the meeting, Margaret Chen pulled me aside. Rick, we've been invited to present at the Virginia Conference on Elder Protection next month. Your restaurant story has become a case study in successful resistance to family financial exploitation. The recognition felt surreal. What had started as personal survival had evolved into community service. My painful experience transformed into protective education for others. That evening, I sat in Martha's favorite chair, reading letters from support group members who'd successfully established boundaries with exploitative family members. Tom stopped by for our evening chess match, as had become our routine. Any word from Andy about your letter? He asked, setting up the board. Not yet, but that's okay. I moved my opening pawn with steady confidence. I'm content either way. Through the window, spring evening light painted the neighborhood in golden hues. Families walked past with children on bicycles, dogs on leashes, the normal rhythms of life continuing around us. My phone buzzed with a text from Michelle. Dad, Andy read your letter. He said he needs time to think, but wants to try. Brittany is not happy about the conditions. I smiled, showing Tom the message. Checkmate in 4 moves, I said, studying the chessboard. We'll see about that, Tom replied. But he was grinning. Outside, spring continued its patient work of renewal. Inside, I prepared for another support group meeting, another opportunity to help seniors protect themselves from family manipulation. My grandson would grow up in a world where his grandfather had chosen self-respect over enablement, boundaries over exploitation. Martha would be proud.